What I find really interesting is I think there's a valid pursuit of knowledge. There's a valid pursuit of understanding within an audience. I think there are a lot of people out there who want to hear well-formed points of view that maybe aren't either the contemporary or the mainstream or whatever it is. They want to hear different points of view. And so they seek out platforms like Joe Rogan, and they hear guests like Dave Smith. And I think there's quite often a tendency, I think this is more true in America than my experience in Europe. If you hear someone who speaks confidently and quickly and throws a lot of what feels like information at you, I think our brains short circuit and assume they're correct, assume they're well resourced, assume they're well intentioned, and assume they're correct. But if you come along and one day they're talking on a topic that you actually know quite deeply about, you have this sudden realization that they do not know what they are saying. I think Dave Smith is one of those examples where he talks very passionately on issues. He quotes an awful lot of books. Those apparently are experts he's quite happy to trust. But then if you actually listen to what he's saying, it's logical fallacy after logical fallacy. It's self-contradiction after self-contradiction. And it's just a lot of him dismissing an argument by hopping to a different argument. I don't think that's knowledge to me. I think it's perfectly reasonable for him to disagree with Douglas Murray and to say that you do not have to have been somewhere to have an opinion on it. That's all true. But that doesn't mean that Douglas Murray is therefore part of the conspiracy because he's only seen what he's been allowed to see, when the opposite is not true. If someone was shown around by Hamas, would Dave Smith see that with the same skepticism that sees someone like Douglas Murray? I don't think he would. I think that's the problem. It's fine to have distrust in any expertise you have out there, but you have to apply it equally. And that's not what I see. Looking at this movement from the outside, where I see these sort of libertarians make this anti-Israel movement, I see them putting a lot of distrust into the Israeli government, which is fine. They're politicians, whether they're Jewish or not, Israeli or not, doesn't really matter. You can distrust politicians. But then they will take the words of an organization like Hamas and just assume it's all true. And no one will even scratch their head and think, can I trust Osama bin Laden's word? The fact that he wrote a letter justifying the 9/11 attacks, can we just assume that's all valid? Of course we can't, but they do, and that's what I do not get.
Yes, you nailed it. The bias is very clear. I mean, I have a bias. I have a bias towards liberty and individualism and Western civilization, and I'm open about the bias. But I think the thing is with Dave and with some others of the libertarian ilk is that they kind of pretend to a sort of neutrality, which gives them the sort of moral clout that they feel they need to make pronouncements such as there should be a two-state solution. My understanding of Dave Smith's ideology was that he was an anarcho-capitalist. So I find, it interesting that you can make an exception to create a brand new nation state as an anarcho-capitalist, but you can't defend Israel, even though it holds to some extent Enlightenment values compared to its opponents in the Middle East. But it's because, and I know that this isn't going to sound like a good excuse or a good reason, but it is all in service to Murray Rothbard and the cult of Murray Rothbard around him, which was to a great extent, and I'm an admirer of Rothbard to an extent. It was a Rothbardian cult of foreign policy, which was so strictly non-interventionist as to, in my opinion, to be isolationist. I'm not saying that pejoratively, just descriptively. And so it becomes like the base ritual. Everybody wants to be on with Rothbard's cult and his inner circle. Everybody wants to feel like an heir to this man. Even Javier Milei quotes him fondly. He did just this last week, even though Walter Block, for example, the Jewish professor who was excommunicated from Mises, I don't think that he was lying when he said a couple of weeks ago that he thought that Murray Rothbard would have loved Javier Milei, but he was definitely wrong because Murray Rothbard despised Israel. And to a large extent, the United States war machine. People would say, let's have a distinction between a nation and a state and a government. I understand. There's a longer discussion to have there, right? If we had hours and hours and hours to have these discussions, I could really give you the microanalysis of who, what, when, where, and why on this. but you're just going to have to trust me to an extent that it's about it really is more of a popular kids club. Who's the closest to Hans Hermann Hoppe and Murray Rothbard? And if you don't adhere to it, then you are excommunicated. So Russell Kirk, he was a famous conservative writer. He called libertarians chirping sectaries, and we are. There are around 10 different schools of thought amongst libertarianism. But after Ron Paul stepped down, most libertarians either quit politics entirely or were so disenfranchised by Ron Paul's loss that they embraced a Rothbardian anarchism, which is an anti-statism that is to the exclusion of minarchism, classical liberalism, constitutionalism, objectivism, even, and everyone became a neocon. You were either a Rothbardian anarchist or you're a neocon. And socialism is everything that the government does. It's a very black and white binary thinking sort of way. But where nuance suddenly becomes involved is when Russia is doing it, or when nuance is suddenly involved is when Israel is attacked and defending itself. And then at that time, we claim to be neutral, but then we're really supporting the other side because all of the grumblings and papers and all of the evidence that's piled up, thousands and thousands of pages high from the Ron Paul Institute of Foreign Policy is all very Putinist, very Putin friendly. There's a reason why Russia today loves to platform people like Daniel McAdams and Scott Horton and others from antiwar.com. It's everything that they say is in service to the Kremlin's propaganda outlets. And this is because there's a culture amongst libertarians of, they call it the Rockwell rule, which is you must never take an opinion that also coincides with what the CIA believes. So if the CIA believes something, then you must take the opposite view on it. In other words, it's anti-intellectualism because it's like when people say Hitler drank water. Therefore, if the water must be bad, don't drink it. It's awful for you, right? It's an anti-intellectualism. It's the conspiracy brain. It's a popularity contest with conspiracy brain, with a complete engorgement of propaganda from America's enemies and opponents around the world, and it just brain dead, much of it. And some of it has to do with the fact that libertarians really just love drugs.
It always comes down to that.
Applause line
always comes down to that. Huh? It's like just give heroin left, right, and center. Everything will be better.
Heroin to 5-year-olds. Yes, exactly. Yes, but then what gets lost is the beautiful philosophy of that Ayn Rand created. What gets lost is the beautiful philosophy of liberty. What gets lost is Mises. Lost in this Rothbardian milieu is Mises, Hayek, and others who found it, and Milton Friedman, who were not anarchists and who made incredible contributions to the world in their lives to the cause of liberty. And all of that is lost. And even I think that the what you might say, this is really where I'm going to lose I'm going to lose my house over this. But I think even like I would call the regime libertarians, I think even to a large extent, although not entirely, I still read some of them over at Reason Magazine and the Cato Institute. Their brains have been so broken by Trump derangement syndrome that they cannot provide a meaningful counter to the conspiracy brain. So the institutions of liberty in Washington, D.C. have been defenestrated, and in large part due to their own making because of their inability to see forest for trees. It's kind of like this, to some extent, I think, misguided war of Thomas Massie against Donald Trump. You can say you picked it, that Trump picked the fight all day long, but you're going to lose that fight. I mean, Massie might remain in office, but he'll never pass the Prime Act, and therefore our principles will never go forward. So all we're really doing is paying and fighting for a politician who will sit in office and do nothing for our ideals, other than just preach about them, which if you like that, that's great, but it's not really the job of a congressman. So it's unfortunate. There's a time in a battle when you have to sort of decide which way you're going to go. And I think that, unfortunately, that regime libertarians or beltway libertarians who have done good work in the past have become so toxically, what's the word I'm looking for? Just poisoned by a form of Trump derangement syndrome, which renders them unable to provide a meaningful antiseptic to the toxicity within the libertarian movement writ large, and which I think is part of the reason it's that we're dying. Is I think people look at the libertarians in the United States and think we are quite unreasonable and unfit to govern, and to a large extent, not entirely, but to a large extent, they're right.